Welcome to What is Going for new thought from the edge of Each week on Times flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandy Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Here is your host, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello. Climate change, global water crises, pollution, the depletion of the Earth's natural resources, increases in extreme weather events like floods, fires, storms. These are just 6 of the major environmental problems that our world is currently facing. It seems that despite all the progress we've made, we've managed to create massive sustainability problems for our children and for future generations of humanity. And yet, while the statistics and facts about climate change, water crises, and environmental damage are horrifying, solutions to these global challenges are all around us. In fact, says our guest today, nature has already solved many of the problems we are grappling with. In the world envisioned by science writer and self-declared nature nerd Janine Benyus, a locust's ability to avoid collision within a roiling cloud of its brethren will inform the design of a crash-resistant car. A self-cleaning leaf will inspire a new kind of paint, one that dries in a pattern that enables simple rainwater to wash away dirt. And organisms capable of living without water will open the way for vaccines that maintain potency even without refrigeration, a hurdle that can prevent life-saving drugs from reaching disease-torn communities. But most importantly, these cool tools from nature pull off their tricks while still managing to preserve the environment that sustains them, a life or death lesson that humankind is in dire need of learning. Janine Benyus joins us tonight to share how what we can learn from nature can save our world. Janine Benyus, welcome.
Hi, Sandy. How are you?
I'm very well, Janine. How are you?
I'm well. It's good to be with you.
Now, you're a biologist and the author of several books on biomimicry, including Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature, which have galvanized scientists, architects, designers, and engineers into exploring new ways in which nature's successes can inspire humanity. So tell us first, what is biomimicry?
Well, you did a very good job of explaining it. It's actually innovation inspired by nature, and it's a new innovation discipline. It's a new practice, actually, in which inventors are beginning to say, what in the natural world has already solved what I'm trying to solve? And then they actually are trying to emulate nature's forms, incredibly evolved shapes, drag reduction shapes, for instance, mimic the processes in the natural world, such as photosynthesis or water purification, and also try to imitate ecosystem strategies to find whole new ways of running our economy in a circular manner, like a forest does. So it's basically a practice of bringing biologists to the design table to create a more sustainable world.
Now, you are a biologist. How did you come across biomimicry?
Well, I kind of hoped that it existed. I think I think all books begin with a good question. They're fertilized by one anyway. And I was a natural history writer, and I had written 5 other books about plant and animal adaptations, basically about how life is so exquisitely matched to its habitat, the kinds of physiologies and anatomies and chemistries and strategies that life has. I was fascinated by these adaptations, and I began to think to myself, at the same time I was learning about some of the things that you talked about at the top of the hour, about the sustainability issues that we have. And I thought, wait a minute, a sustainable world already exists. It's this 3.8 billion year beautifully evolved system that enhances its place while meeting its needs, right? And I thought that surely there was probably a discipline out there in which, people say who are trying to figure out how to make a better solar cell would hang out with people studying leaves. And I found out that was actually pretty rare when I started to collect for the book in 1990. I began to look for this, and I realized that yes, there were a few people who were starting to, basically look at sort of how spiders make their silk for to make less toxic fiber manufacture, and people were studying prairies. Wes Jackson studying the prairie to come up with an agriculture that was a polyculture. A mixed species, perennial polycultures. I started to see some of this. Some people were studying leaves to come up with better solar cells, and yet I kept collecting for this book, and there was really no name for this discipline. All these people had this in common, whether they were looking at energy or business or medicine, and yet they didn't self-identify. So that's a tremendous opportunity for a writer. So I named the folder Biomimicry that I was collecting things in. And that's what I called the book. And it's been a really interesting thing to watch ever since, this self-identifying emerging discipline.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you have any idea when you wrote that book that it was going to make such an impact and galvanize so many people into action?
No, I really did not. In fact, I realized that it was a very important concept. In fact, I wrote another book before I wrote Biomimicry to become even a better writer, while I was collecting for it. And I realized it was hugely important. I realized that it not only would help us create more sustainable innovations, I also realized that it would change the way we view and value the natural world. I mean, that's how I saw it. And so I wrote it carefully, and I wrote it with great good, hope. But, I was a natural history writer. Very few people read science books, unfortunately. And that wasn't the case with this one. And it really did surprise me how much it's I think the world was very much ready to turn to nature again. I think it was a remembering of what we used to do, and so there was some familiarity there, some sort of sense of, oh yeah, right, the natural world has been here all along. Of course, there's solutions there. I mean, and so it became incredibly popular. But no, I did not imagine it would be.
Well, of course, I mean, it's not that long ago, certainly for the older generations, that people remember people who farmed in natural ways. They didn't rely on fertilizers, etc. I remember reading The Secret Life of Plants years and years ago, probably back in the 80s, and being absolutely riveted by what I read about nature that I never knew.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, it goes back even, I've been reading a book called Tending the Wild, which was about how indigenous people in California for millennia, were, the way they farmed was by, tending wild plants that were growing, right, naturally in their native places. And there was this, the biomimetic farming it's not just organic farming without fertilizers. It's actually farming that mimics what would grow there naturally. And we're starting to see some of that taking hold. So, for instance, a lot of people are talking about agroecology or agroforestry, meaning growing crops and trees in the same area, right? Or you can think about shade-grown coffee, and you look at a shade-grown coffee plantation, and it kind of looks like a 3-story tropical forest. That's a mimetic agriculture in which it's not just that you're not doing, obviously you're not doing chemicals, agrochemicals, but you're actually relying on the ecosystem structures, the patterns that work there naturally, and then trying to mimic them. And that's what the perennial polyculture was. Wes Jackson's work with the Land Institute was looking at prairies and saying, okay, this is a mixture of species, that most of them are perennials, so the soil's always covered. There are legumes and nitrogen fixers in the mix, so it sponsors its own fertility. And now, all these years later, as we face a climate-changed planet and we look for ways to store carbon deeply and to store water, farmers are now beginning to plant a cocktail of different cover crops, so that they don't leave their soils open in the winter, right? And that's more of a, the polyculture is a mimicry of what would be there naturally. So yeah, it's something, like I said, there's a memory to this, but it was when we were back, I think, very much closer to the ecosystems that we lived in, and that we were looking for patterns that worked there. So, you had people like the Papago Indians.
I'm going to have to leave you there,
in Delta.
Janine. So we'll come back to this after the break. We'll be back in a few moments. Stay tuned.
The future of Internet radio is here. Om Times Radio. IOM FM. As difficult as it is to believe, there are places in Africa where human traffickers sell albino children and their body parts for use in magic rituals. Humanity Healing International is actively working in Uganda to change this paradigm. The Albino Rescue Project finds albino children who are at risk and places them in safe schools and environments where they can learn and grow free from fear. To learn more or to sponsor a child, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
This is Terry Van Horn, and I want to invite you to join me for my weekly radio show, Healing Light, on Om Times Radio, every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. On Healing Light, we want to bring love, light, and blessings into your world. You can find out more about us at www.healinglightonline.com. Blessings.
My name is Meera Batra, and this is How I Live United. Many families have come to America for a better life. I advocate for these families with United Way. United Way empowers them to see opportunities available. We help them get involved with their kids, schools, and network within the community. My name is Meera Batra. I help families see opportunity and succeed. I don't just wear the shirt, I live it.
Give, advocate, volunteer. Live United. Go to liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to What is Going On. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and I'm speaking with biologist and science writer Janine Benyus about biomimicry, a revolutionary new science that is learning from nature how we can save our world. Janine, you say that we've spent more than 250 years, I would say probably a lot longer than that, learning about nature. And now it's time for us to learn from nature, how it communicates, cooperates, self-heals, and self-organizes. Tell us a little bit about nature, the things that we don't know.
Oh gosh, that's a big question, Sandy. Well, I'm just going to tell you what I'm looking at now. I live in western Montana, so I'm looking out at a tree. The leaves have just fallen, and when I see a tree like that, what I see now that after studying biomimicry is this incredible, this being, this community member, and the consummate engineer. I mean, when I'm looking right now at the branches, I'm looking at mathematically, this has been proven. It's the best distribution network in the world, is in the mathematics of branches. It's something called the Murray Law. There's a mathematical formula for how a tree branches. And the branches, think of it, are just distributing fluids, right, up from the roots, and then the sugars are coming down from the leaves. And the roots are the same way. They have the same mathematical formula. So I'm looking at a distribution network that's very different than the kind of pipes I have in my own house, which have all kinds of 90-degree angles. I don't see any 90-degree angles. This is a friction-free plumbing device, right? And it holds out leaves, which are incredible solar. It's a solar array that's not put the way we do a solar array in a big flat thing on a stalk. You know, it's actually, you know, put in a three-dimensional form, and each of those leaves are tilting slightly to reach the sun. They are doing all kinds of things. They're radiating heat away from the tree in the summer. They're a communication device. When a caterpillar eats one of the leaves on one side of the tree, that leaf will actually start to send out chemical signals through the tree, and then the leaves on the other side of the tree will begin to beef up their defenses. But it doesn't end there, because beneath the ground there are fungal colonies, fungus called mycorrhizal fungus, that wraps around the roots. And these are in a partnership with the tree, and the mycorrhizae are giving the tree phosphorus. The tree gives sugars to the mycorrhizae. Well, those mycorrhizal fungi, they look like Halloween cobwebs under the ground, and they go out into my field up to the other trees that are there, wrap around their roots, and when one tree gets hit by a caterpillar, it sends alarm signals which go under the ground, which go through this mycorrhizal net, which is called the Wood Wide Web, by the way, by scientists now. And those alarm signals go to the other trees, and those trees are then told about the caterpillar coming, so they can beef up their defenses and become less palatable to the. And they're also exchanging water with one another. They're exchanging phosphorus with one another, carbon with one another. So a tree that might be, or a shrub that might be in the shade of a forest, we now know is actually getting carbon, sugar, from the trees that are in the sunlight and photosynthesizing. So this kind of knowledge now is really shaking up what I learned as a forest scientist, where we learned that, all trees were in head-to-head competition with one another for light and nutrients. And now we're realizing, no, it actually looks more like a sharing economy out there. That's really interesting. So these are the things that, as you start to understand more and more about how nature works for miracles, you can't help but admire, but also, for people who are trying to invent a new and more sustainable human world, you realize that, that you're looking at this, the biological intelligence that's all around us, this incredible library, not of resources, but of ideas. That's what biomimicry tends to do to you. You start to walk around the forest and go, wow, and every organism I look at, I now say, how are you doing what you're doing? Because what you're doing is not just powering yourself and feeding yourself and housing yourself, things that we want to do, but you're also enhancing this habitat for your offspring. And that's a trick we need to learn. from you?
Well, having read Biomimicry, I realise, I think most of us would say we're nature lovers, but we don't have a clue. And I think when one really understands just, as you've just described about trees and their system and their communication abilities, and that's just trees, there's the rest of the animal world, the plant kingdom, etc., that are doing similar wonderful things, that we need to develop more reverence for nature. And I'm just fascinated by some of the ideas that have emerged from biomimicry. I mean, self-cleaning fabrics based on how pigeon feathers shed water. A new industrial Velcro-like joining system that replaces screws and bolts inspired by clams. I mean, these are just some of the innovations that have resulted from biomimicry. Tell us about some of the others, because, one can't help but just let your jaw drop when you hear what people are creating, having watched what nature does.
Oh, absolutely. Every day, Sandy, I wake up and there's a new innovation. But the ones that I think, I think people are living with biomimetic innovations. They may not realize it, right? So you have, for instance, the noise canceling chip in your phone is based on how the human auditory system works. When you walk through the airport and there's that millimeter wave detector, that's based on a Brazilian free-tailed bat, and how that bat echolocates. And increasingly now, when you go to hospitals, your very life can be influenced by biomimicry. There's one of the things I'm really excited about, it's a company called Sharplet. And they tackled this really big problem of, we use too many antibiotics and too many harsh cleansers and organisms become superbugs in response, right? It breeds for resistance. So what they said was, what in the natural world really does a good job of keeping bacteria off its surface? And they looked in the ocean. The ocean is just, it's teeming with bacteria. And most organisms have a biofilm on them. They've got a sheet of bacteria on them, if not, barnacles and everything else. But the Galapagos shark is a slow-moving shark, and it does not have any bacteria on it. So they looked for a chemical. They figured it was a poison, because that's how we do things, and it wasn't. It was the shape of its skin denticles. It's these little diamond-shaped things on its skin. They mimicked that in a thin film, kind of think contact paper that you can put on doorknobs and handles and beds and things like that. And what it does, bacteria just don't like to land on it. So it repels them, it doesn't kill them. And that means it doesn't breed for resistance. So an entirely new way of working with bacteria. There's a really important desalination membrane that now has been inspired by something that you have in many of your red blood cells. It's this little hour-shaped glass pore in the membrane that is being mimicked now. And what it does is it's forward osmosis instead of reverse osmosis. So what most desalination is, the reason it's expensive is that you push all the salt water against a membrane. You push it. That's how we do it, with 900 pounds of pressure per square inch. And then it gets clogged with salt. But what life does is it pulls water molecules through these small little pores that are shaped and charged in a certain way. And then it leaves everything else. It leaves the fresh water on the other side. And that's going to really change things. It's really low energy. It's 100 times more permeable than reverse osmosis. Those kinds of things, the big ones, like we're now realizing that, this tree I mentioned to you, it's 50% by weight carbon dioxide. That's where it gets its carbon, is from the air. So, and it has a chemistry to do this. So that's been mimicked now. And there are companies that are beginning to make plastics out of CO2. There's a company called New Light and Novomer. The Body Shop is going to start doing all its packaging out of CO2. It's a plant-inspired process. Also, there's a company called Blue Planet, another one called Calera, and the owner of those companies is Brent Constance. He's a coral reef expert, and he realized, coral reefs are cement-like. You know, they're concrete-like. And then he realized that 6% of all CO2 emissions are from the making of concrete. So he mimicked the recipe of the coral reef and is now taking seawater and CO2 emissions from smokestacks and out-precipitates the raw materials for concrete. So and that actually sequesters CO2. Imagine your building sequestering CO2. And that's, again, another biomimetic. So there's some very big biomimetic technologies that are coming out that I'm pretty excited about. But there's all kinds of them all around you already. What I'd love to do, Sandy, is make sure that, and this is a program we're doing in our nonprofit, we're trying to say to people, you know, the organism is the first one on the patent, and therefore we should be paying these organisms some royalties. We should be conserving habitat with a percent. Right, it's called innovation for conservation. To say thank you in a meaningful way.
You're listening to What is Going On. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and I'm speaking with biologist and innovation consultant Janine Benyus, author of the book Biomimicry. Still to come, more problem-solving ecological inventions that have been developed because someone asked, how does nature solve this problem? We'll be back in a few moments. Don't go away.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, Om Times Radio, IOM FM. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. Om Times Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single Om Times endeavor. Host your show with Om Times Radio Network.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on Om Times Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
There is no death, only a change of worlds. Chief Seattle. Deborah Livingston is an award-winning intuitive psychic medium whose international services include mediumship, spiritual assessment, animal communication, and spiritual mentoring. She is a published author and a trained shaman. Deborah provides evidential messages from spirit and departed loved ones. Learn more at deblivemedium.com. That's DEBLIV medium.com.
Hi, I found a toy dinosaur over on the playground by Smith Street. It had this phone number on it, and, well, I just wanted to make sure the dinosaur made it back to its little owner.
When I found the little sippy cup, I just had to give you a call. It's for a kid, you know?
I know my son gets super attached to the smallest things, even a fire truck, and I'd be happy to drop it off.
We'd do anything for kids, yet 1 in 6 children in the U.S. struggle with hunger. Help end childhood hunger near you. Learn how at feedingamerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Janine Benyus, architects studying zebra stripes to see what we can learn about staying cool and buildings based on termite mounds. Tell us about some of the other ways that nature-inspired design is shifting the way we create.
Oh, gosh. Well, you know, you bring up one of the things that we work in a lot is the built world. I have a company now, after the book came out, called Biomimicry 3.8. for 3.8 billion years of evolution. And we work with inventors, product designers, people in the built world, and like architects and city planners, and also organizational development. But in the built world, I'm really excited about how we're taking nature's wisdom to reimagining cities. And what we do there is we work with people who are doing city planning, and they say, well, what is a biomimetic city? And we say, well, you know, it would be a city that performs or functions like the wild land next door. What does that mean? And well, when you look as ecologists, when you go to a forest or a prairie or a coral reef, you realize that those systems are incredibly generous. I would call them generous. And what they give away are free ecosystem services. And those are things like they clean the air, they clean the water, they build soil, they nurture biodiversity, they store water, they store carbon. And there's all these services. They reduce erosion and mitigate floods. We call them ecosystem services. They're things that ecosystems do for free. And it occurred to us that as human beings, as we mature, shouldn't our settlements produce the same level of ecosystem services, at least meet or exceed? So we actually work with city managers now, and we say, okay, we're going to go to the wildland next door, to the most intact, healthy place we can find, and we'll measure how much water is being cleaned each year, how much water is being stored, how much carbon is being stored, cooling, degrees of cooling. And then we go back and we say, okay, per acre, this is what the city should be doing. It should be functioning like this. And so therefore, as you're building in this block, here's your new metrics. We call them ecological performance metrics. And they say, whoa, you know, how do we do this? Do we just plant a lot of trees? We say, yeah, you know, planting is good. That's really good. But also, how do we get our buildings to pull their ecological weight, and our sidewalks and our infrastructure, and, you know, the infrastructure and the ecostructure together? So remember I was talking about the CO2 sequestering concrete.
Yeah.
You know, why, you know, if you had a metric that said you have to sequester a certain amount of carbon on this block, here's your metric. You'd find all kinds of ways to do it. You know, you'd save your scrap from the restaurants, and you'd create, you know, healthier soils around your landscaping. You'd perhaps put in a green roof. You'd make CO2 sequestering concrete. You'd find ways to keep people from, you know, commuting and using as much CO2 to get to, you know, commuting by car to get to your place. I mean, there would be this, and that's only one ecosystem service, right? And I would say that if we were to start to think of ourselves as being functionally indistinguishable from wildlands, I know it's a stretch, but it's, to me, that's what all organisms and systems have had to do on this planet, is learn to be generous in that way, you know, to give cleaner water than what came in to the system, cleaner air, and put that downwind. And that's a switch in the way we think about what we as a species can do. And when you give designers and architects and landscape architects and planners those metrics, to me, it's really surprising what they do. They, you know, and we're doing it at the building level too. We're working with a company called Interface. They make carpet tiles, big, huge company, and they've got 7 factories around the world. And we're saying, okay, well, what if your factory behaved like the forest next door, right? So we figure out, you know, they've got 5.7 hectares of big old factory and a white roof and a big parking lot and a buried stream, and we say, okay, you know, here are your metrics. And suddenly they're saying, okay, how are we going to clean water from this site? You know, why don't we bring that buried stream? Why don't we daylight it again? Why don't we bring that back? Why don't we plant some things? Do we really need this big a parking lot? Can we do a permeable pavement? Can we dig up some of it? You know, to meet the metrics. And what happens is you start to transform that place into a really nice place to live and work. as well as being a generous place.
You know, it makes sense. I mean, every building we go in fact, our entire environment, it does affect us on one level or another. So it makes a lot of sense to think about our environment and the buildings that we enter as extensions of our own physiology. I loved the piece when you said about the architects with the termite mound and the 7-story office building in Harare that's based on that, with no air conditioning, and yet it stays cool because they've mimicked
in Harare.
Termite mound.
Can you imagine that? Yeah, I mean, the termite mound is an amazing structure for the size of those little termites, right? It's huge. It's a huge structure because some of them can be, you know, in Africa, they can be 6, 7, 8 feet tall. But they're riddled with these incredible tunnel systems, and they go way deep down into the ground. The termites actually live down there, and the mound acts like a lung. So when you say extension of the physiology, it actually is. Yeah. So, you know, they use that, the air comes into that mound and blows across that mound. And as it goes in, it literally, I mean, the way they have the tunnels created and the chambers created, it exchanges, you know, CO2 for and oxygen. It keeps the humidity, and it keeps at certain levels, and it keeps the temperature within like 1 degree, okay, of what is and even though outside it's getting very cold at night in the desert or in Africa, or it's getting very hot during the day, but there's a temperature control that I'll tell you, there's a lot of engineers literally doing MRI scans on termite mounds, trying to figure out what is it about the shape of those tunnels, and so in a very stylistic way, even Mike Pierce, who did the building in Harare, the Eastgate building, he began to mimic that, and he uses airflow, and he uses, you know, cooling of thermal mass of concrete and things like that, and a useful, and the stack effect of a chimney stack effect of the heat rising. It's really an amazing thing. He's done the same thing in Australia, but yeah, that, you know, as we ask ourselves things like, how does nature ventilate? You begin to find, I had in my own house, my partner and I built a house recently, about 5 years ago. And we went out into our own, in western Montana, we went out into our own pasture. We have a pasture and some forest and 2 big ponds. And we went out and we did a Genius of Place report like we do for our clients. And what we found was that most of the thermoregulation was happening under the ground. So we had ground squirrels and harvester ants and turtles burrowing in the mud in the winter, and all this stuff was happening in the ground. So we did ground source heat pump. And then we found that the mounds of ground squirrels are really interesting. They basically build their bedroom chambers. You know, they've got like a horizontal tunnel under the ground, and their bedroom chambers are down in there. And what they do is they have 2 entrances, and they build a mound, and one mound is higher than the other mound. And when the wind goes over the higher mound, it goes at faster wind speeds. And so it creates a siphon effect for the wind, for the air, and it ventilates it. So we actually had our architect build the exact same thing into our house. And so we don't use air conditioning. We just open the doors, and we've got a sort of a monitor, kind of a cupola kind of a thing that does the same thing. It's higher than our doors. And so it's a really, I mean, that's the process of biomimicry. It's just look around and see how life's already meeting its needs.
I remember reading not so long ago, I don't remember where, something about if you move into a new home, don't touch the garden. Let it run wild for about 6 months to a year. And what you'll find is what starts growing in that garden is different than what was there before, very likely. And that it will actually start growing things that are right for you and your body.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Huh.
I don't know where that came from. It may have been the Anastasia books. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but there was a Russian person who wrote a book about nature and about how we can learn to live with nature again. Like, I've got a friend who's got a Russian gardener, and he says whenever you're planting seeds, put them in your mouth first. Let your saliva, your DNA get onto that seed, because then whatever you're growing is going to be so much more beneficial for you.
No, that's interesting.
And that makes sense.
Sounds like muscle testing.
That really, really does make sense.
Interesting.
What many people are concerned about what's happening with the world's crops with GMOs. Is there anything that you're aware of that is being done that can actually counteract that or make it less damaging?
Well, you know, the genetically modified organisms are what nature wouldn't do. I mean, we ask ourselves in our business and in our nonprofit, the Biomimicry Institute, we ask students to ask themselves this: what would nature do here? And the other question is, what wouldn't nature do here? And what genetically modified organisms, what that whole thing is about very often is something that really doesn't happen very often in the natural world, which is the genes of one kind of organism, say a flounder, getting put into another kind of organism, a plant like a strawberry plant. So that's like two classes of animals, genes from one going into the other. And individual, you know, there's just a whole bunch of things that, you know, individual genes travel in assemblies. You know, they're not like injected in the natural world by one gene. So there's all kinds of ways in which, you know, that's not biomimetic at all. Not the least of which is that when a plant like that gets released into the wild, we haven't considered its system effects, right? And what's going to happen when it's in the wild. So I'm really very, very leery, and I speak out very strongly against genetically modified organisms. So what's the alternative? And the alternative, actually, what you're looking for.
Hold it there, Janine.
I'll talk about later.
I really want to know what that alternative is. I'm sensitive here. Science.
Bringing a more conscious lifestyle to your world. Om Times Radio. IOM FM.
Spiritual, metaphysical, green living, psychic, alternative healing, life coaching. Do any of these or similar terms apply to your business or cause? If so, you are in a niche market with a very specific audience. Conscious Gate PR is the world's leading conscious public relations agency. With a global reach of over 4 million and growing, we offer comprehensive media campaigns to our targeted market. Learn more at consciousgatepr.com. Conscious marketing for conscious minds.
Hi everyone, this is Shay Parker, the host of Best of the Best, which airs live right here on IOM Radio every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific. I'm super excited to bring you expert guest hosts, spiritual discussions, free psychic readings, and so much more. I can promise that you will not want to miss this one-of-a-kind, fun, yet touching, down-to-earth show. Join us every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Pacific on OTR-FM. This is Shay Parker, and I can't wait to see you there.
If you own a gun, you have a full-time responsibility. When you aren't using it, be sure it can't get into the hands of curious children, troubled teenagers, a thief, or anyone else who might misuse it. Your family, friends, and neighbors are all counting on you. Remember, always, lock it up. For more information on firearm storage safety, visit ncpc.org. This message brought to you by the National Crime Prevention Council, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Janine, GMOs, what's the alternative?
The alternative is to look at how plants are growing in healthy conditions and find out who the helpers are and help the helpers. And I'll explain that. A lot of what you hear about GMOs is that, oh, you know, we're going to be able to grow them in conditions, in droughty conditions or salty soils. You know, we'll be able to give them sort of superpowers. Well, actually, there's a great, this is a good example of this kind of helping the helpers thinking. There's a guy named Rusty Rodriguez, UW scientist, who was interested in creating more drought-resistant plants. He did an interesting thing. He went to Yellowstone National Park. He went to the hot pools, and right next to them, he found plants growing. And frankly, they shouldn't be growing there because it's too hot. I mean, physiologically, as a biologist, it's one of those things you go, how is this happening? And so what he did was he looked not just at the plant, he looked at the system. He looked at the helpers. He looked down at the roots, and he realized that they were entwined with these fungal creatures that I talked to you about, the mycorrhizal fungi. And he realized that with those, the plant was able to endure amazing things. And so it's a partnership. So he began, and he actually has a nonprofit company. He's working with farmers, and they're inoculating the seeds with fungal helpers. And these fungal helpers, for instance, rice, they're able to grow rice with half of the water requirements. That's incredibly important for a lot of reasons. They're able to grow in hotter soils. You know, in our climate changed world, I think the subtleties of figuring out how to help the helpers, in this case, how do we help the fungus, or how do we create the condition for this suite of bacteria, fungi, and other organisms that are in the soil, the living soil, that actually wind up, the plant feeds them, and they feed the plant. Organic farmers know this, but people are starting to now realize that you can have a GMO plant, but you're focusing on just the plant, right? And we've gone about as far as we can go. It's very expensive to get a GMO plant commercialized, and actually it's ignoring the whole system. If you have a plant right next door that has a very, very healthy soil microbiology around its roots, and it's growing with other plants that actually are beneficial to it, back to the perennial polycultures, it can protect itself against pests. It can handle droughty conditions. It can handle a little bit of salt in the soil, right? So the chutzpah, if you will, comes from the system, not from some genetically engineered silver bullet that actually, my friend Amory Levin says, genetic engineering, it's neither genetic nor is it engineering, because it's very imprecise. We're not very, we're sort of like planting it and hoping everything works out. Whereas if you do biomimetic agriculture, what you're doing is saying, let's go to a place where there's tremendous health going on, find out how those plants are doing it, like Rusty did when he went to Yellowstone and found this incredibly hardy plant. And he had to look at the system. And then how do you recreate that system or create conditions conducive to a system like that in your own agriculture?
Yeah.
It's very similar to what we're saying now with medicine, Sandy. How do we help our gut microbes, for instance, right?
Yeah.
Same thing.
Exactly.
Help the
Same
helpers.
thing. Yeah.
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 Same thing.
In a video I watched, you said, we've run to the end of our leash in terms of arrogance. Now we're learning to say, how do we live on this planet over the long haul? What can each of us do to support that? Where do we start?
I honestly think that the first step in biomimicry is quieting human cleverness, which I know that your audience knows something about. You can't listen to the natural world without quieting your own cleverness. when we realize, of course, this is a rhetorical problem I have because I talk about learning from nature. We are nature, but we're young. I mean, I think that's the first step. Part of quieting human cleverness is to realize that as a species, as spectacular as we are very young on this planet. And I think it's time for us to sit down and learn from our elders. And that means, you know, letting go of the hubris that if we just sit in a room by ourselves, we're going to figure it out. We don't need to do that. There are all these other organisms ready to gift us with their, not just their intelligence, but their wisdom, because it's intelligence that has been tested and tried in place over long periods of time. So it's wisdom. But what it takes is the ability literally to quiet the cleverness, and then there's a practice actually, and it's very simple, and anyone can do it. And we're teaching school kids to do it all the time in our nonprofit, which is when you have a decision to make or a design, whether you're designing your day or designing a garden, you say to yourself, literally say to yourself, how would nature solve this? Go outside with that question in your heart. Sit there, and you'll begin to see patterns. Even if you're not a scientist, you can begin to pique your curiosity, and you'll begin to see things in the natural world. If you stop seeing nature as scenery or as a recreational stage, but rather as a school, you know, as a wellspring of wisdom, and literally go out there and learn. And then, of course, you can always come in and, you know, there's all kinds of people, wonderful people called biologists and ecologists who we spend our lives learning this stuff. And so you can ask us, you can hire a biologist if you work in a company and you invent things, hire a biologist to come in and, you know, and at the beginning of the design process, say, how would nature do this? I mean, and it's not just products or buildings. It's also, how would nature form a team? We work with companies all the time, startups, and they come to us and they say, you know, we want to build a biomimetic company. How do we do that? So we say, okay, well, what are the functions? We do the same thing we would do with designing a product or chemistry or what. We say, what's the function? What do you want to do? Not what do you want to design, but what do you want to do? Oh, well, we want to be able to communicate, you know, friction-free communication. We want to be able to communicate freely with one another. It's like, okay, well, how does nature communicate? Let's go figure that out. You know, what are nature's communication protocols? How does nature network? What do the networks in the natural world look like? What is cooperation? Why does cooperation happen in the natural world? Right now, you know, in the fall, you're seeing, I'm watching, as I talk to you, I'm watching all these different kinds of species of birds get together, and they flock up in the fall. And the reason they flock up, you know, normally, yeah, they're different species. They're going to be doing their different things. But here we have titmice and woodpeckers and nuthatches, and they're all together. Why? Because in the fall, the berries are still out there, and the seeds are still out there, but they're kind of hard to find. So what they do is they fly together in flocks, and when somebody finds this little dispersed set of berries or whatever, they start to call, and everybody comes over, and they help each other. I watch that all the time. So lessons about cooperation are in the natural world, as well as lessons about really good chemistry and really good physics. So I would just say,
Janine,
you know,
I want to interrupt you here because
try practicing it.
We've got about a minute left, and I want you to tell our listeners how they can get involved.
Oh, yeah. Oh, please. Yeah, you know, so we have this company, but we also have a nonprofit. So it's called the Biomimicry Institute. It's biomimicry.org. We're reaching enormous numbers of students both in K through 12. So if you have teachers that we can, download curricula for your kids' school, have the teachers join our Biomimicry Educators Network. You can take a master's level course in biomimicry through Arizona State University now. So we're teaching people from K through 12 all the way through university. We have a free public domain website for inventors everywhere, and this is very important to me. Any inventor anywhere in the world can go to asknature.org, type in a question, and up will come biological strategies. You can help us. And we've got this amazing, especially if you have students in your household, we have an amazing design challenge. And I am going to give, in a week from now, I'm going to give a team $100,000 design challenge. Yeah, so biomimicry.org, check it out.
Biomimicry.org and nature.org. I'm so sorry we're out of time, Janine, but thank you for being with us.
No problem. Thanks,
and
Andy.
The book is Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature by Janine Benyus. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer. I hope you'll join me next week for another edition of What is Going On. Till then, it's goodbye.